Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women who are reshaping our world. Coming up, she is now probably the most famous French woman in the world, Gisèle Pelicot, the 72-year-old grandmother who was drugged unconscious so her husband and scores of other men could rape her, gives evidence at her rape trial. Also, why ageism is never in style. We'll meet Jacynth Bassett, the woman behind the consultancy who is challenging outdated stereotypes. And with more women in work than ever before in Ivory Coast, the need for childcare has become paramount, but the cost of privately run crèches is way beyond the reach of most families. It's not us who should feel shame, but them. Those words by Gisèle Pelicot, who was giving evidence at a trial in southern France about the dozens of men who raped her at her husband's bidding. This as she was drugged and unconscious. The case sparking a massive debate about male violence in French society, while Gisèle Pelicot herself has become a global feminist icon.
Gisèle Pelicot has inspired an outpouring of support and solidarity from people galvanised by her decision to shine a light on her ordeal, so as to shift the blame from the victim onto the perpetrators. 8 weeks into an historic and harrowing trial, the 72-year-old told the court that she was broken and didn't know how she was going to rebuild herself, but that she wanted to change society in terms of how it deals with sexual assault. She then addressed her former husband, Dominique Pelicot, in the dock, asking him to explain what made him, over almost a decade, drug her, rape her, and enlist dozens of strangers to do the same.
She didn't come to collect prison sentences. That's absolutely not her approach. One argument that comes up a lot is that a rapist is a man who waits in the dark under a bridge with a gun and commits a violent rape. What she wanted to show is that this is not always the case, and that most of the time it's someone who is perfectly normal.
Despite video evidence against them, at least 35 of the defendants have denied the rape charges, claiming that Dominique Pelicot tricked them into believing it was a sex game. His lawyer says that's not true.
Dominique Pelicot has never tried to minimise his responsibility, but he's always contested the claim that he's a manipulator and a liar, or that he did not explain the situation to the men who came to abuse his wife.
With husbands, grandfathers, men young and old among the accused, the mass trial has prompted deep soul-searching in France. 2/3 of rapes in France occur in private homes, and the vast majority of victims know their rapists. French criminal law defines rape as committed on someone using violence, coercion, threat or surprise, and prosecutors must prove the intention to rape to secure a guilty verdict. But the Pelicot case has prompted calls to change the law to include the notion of consent, as it already is in much of Europe.
Now, take a look at any workplace these days and you'll most likely see a far wider range of age groups than ever before. This is the number of older women currently employed or seeking employment increases every year. For instance, in the UK alone, the employment rate of women aged over 65 represents the fastest growth in any age sector. Yet ageism is still a vast problem in many workplaces. Jacynth Bassett is the founder of the UK consultancy entitled Ageism is Never in Style. And I'm delighted to say she joins me in the studio today. Thank you so much, Jacynth, for coming in.
Me.
Ageism really is the last acceptable form of discrimination in many societies across the world. But when you add a layer of sexism, it becomes a whole different other story, doesn't it?
Absolutely. What we call it is gendered ageism, and that's the intersectionality between ageism and sexism. And when you actually really look at it as a whole, we talk a lot about ageism as people get older, but one of the misunderstandings with ageism is actually it's any form of discrimination or prejudice on the grounds of age. So people do experience it often more likely as they get older, but younger people do too, and we see that very much particularly in the case of women who can either be perceived as too young or too old. Really, are they ever the right age?
Indeed. And I mean, I hate to ask you this because I could be accused of reverse ageism, but if you look at somebody like yourself, Why did you decide to set up such a consultancy? And what do you actually do with companies themselves?
Yeah, so as you say, I am quite unusual. I am younger than a lot of people working in this space. And I've actually been working in it longer than a lot of people in this space for about 10 years, which isn't a huge amount of time, but in a space that is still relatively fresh and evolving, it is longer than quite a few people. And really my inspiration came from my mum. She had me at the age of 40, so she was classed as what one calls a geriatric pregnancy. And really, I guess from a subconscious level, from her 50s and my teens onwards, I started to notice how she was increasingly feeling alienated and invisible in the eyes of society just because she was getting older. So really, it was whilst I was at university, I started to really cotton on and think more about it and realize we've got something completely wrong here. We have an aging population. We have an aging society. We shouldn't be valuing people just based on a number that is completely arbitrary and abstract and based around stereotypes. And it's time to change that narrative.
As I was saying earlier, Jacynth, the workplace these days includes multiple generations, anything from baby boomers to Gen X to millennials to Gen Zs. Now, LinkedIn has done some research recently, and it found that 1 in 5 members of Generation Z, and that's people aged under 27, have not spoken to somebody at their work aged over 50. And in return, 44% of the over 55s have avoided having conversations with younger members of the staff. So how do you create a culture where everybody feels comfortable to talk to one another and where all age groups are celebrated?
I think it starts with having a conversation. And what we see with a lot of DE&I is age is still left out of the conversation. So statistically, of those companies that have DE&I strategies, only 8% include age. So we have a lot of networks, we have a lot of conversations around other points of diversity and inclusivity, which is absolutely vital and important, but age is often forgotten about. So we need to start having those conversations and fostering an environment where even through a mentoring scheme, for example, and you could have both sides mentoring. So it's not just older mentoring younger are also mentoring older, and it's an interchanging of skills. And that is really how you foster a far more inclusive culture, which has also been found to improve productivity, innovation, and creativity. So it's not just a social need, it's also a commercial need.
Let's come back to gendered ageism. And as you pointed out earlier, it's never a good age to be a woman, is it?
No, it is not a good age to be a woman. If you look at the 20s, a woman is often perceived as too immature, too inexperienced in the work. Taking the workplace as an example, she's too immature and too inexperienced compared to her male counterparts. In her 30s, maybe she might go on maternity leave. She might get married, start family. I mean, these are all obviously based on stereotypes and preconceived ideas of what age stages are, but that is what unfortunately is embedded. Then you have 40s, premenopausals, 50s, menopausal, 60s, suddenly she's now irrelevant. So as we say, there is no right age to be a woman. And I think you can really break this down when you look at what we call the life analogues, so the stages culturally in sort of folklore that we look at for a man versus a woman. A man's 3 life stages are youth, warrior, sage, whereas a woman's is maid, mother, crone. So her entire, essentially, value is based on her perceived biological clock. And this is what we have to really dismantle.
And Jacynth, you were behind a really interesting Instagram campaign where there were lots of posts entitled, I Look My Age. Tell me more about it.
So we created I Look My Age as a follow-on from a project we worked on with the charity Centre for Ageing Better in the UK. They have what they call an age-positive image library, which is really particularly focusing on improving representation of people over the age of 50, because representation is so critical to changing the narrative around ageing. So we created this campaign off the back of working with them, where we created a series of editorial style images of women in their 50s and 60s. They themselves have been used globally with millions of views and downloads. And then I Look My Age was really to get that conversation moving further. One of the things we see a lot with ageism is how it's embedded into our conversation in our language through backhanded compliments. So one of the things that we hear a lot of is, you look great for your age, or you've still got it. Of course, the subtext of that is that it's actually somewhat of a surprise that you can look good as you get older. So I Look My Age was partly in response to that, to reclaim this whole idea of, no, I don't look good for my age, I just look my age, and also to celebrate the individuality and the diversity of people as they get older. There's no right way to age. So it's about saying, this is me, this is my version of my age right now, this might be your version of what you look like right now. And it ended up with over 45 million global views. It's just continued, even though it was launched a year ago, it has continued to change the narrative and been a really empowering message for people of all ages to take part in.
Jacynth, congratulations on your great work, and thank you so much for coming in. Now, almost half of women in Ivory Coast are in paid employment or running their own businesses. That's compared to just over a third a decade ago. And as the number of working mothers grows, it's creating a rapid rise in the demand for childcare. However, private crèche places are costly and out of reach for many families, as Siobhan Silk reports.
Many working parents in Ivory Coast rely on family members to look after their children during the day, while those who can afford it have traditionally employed nannies. But as the number of women in the paid workforce continues to rise, there's now a growing demand for more professionalised childcare.
I prefer to put my child in a crèche so that I can be more peaceful and more productive at work. I don't have to worry about what's going on at home because parents don't have confidence in nannies anymore.
Along with 300 state-run daycares across Ivory Coast, there's a boom in private crèches. Staff are trained in early childhood development.
I talk about an early learning space. As professionals, we can't just run a day nursery where the children play and then we sit there watching them. That's why we follow an educational program for the children, and we make observations. We do all the preschool activities with the children.
But with a place in crèche typically costing more than minimum wage, it's out of reach for most working women who are in the informal economy. One market in Abidjan is making childcare more accessible for its workers. It runs a crèche at a fraction of the usual cost. Market trader Abibatu used to bring her toddler with her to work.
Where I sell, it's by the side of the road, so it's not a safe place for children to play. That's why I enrolled her here. They're teaching her to read and write. She's developed a lot. She's talking a lot. She's learning a lot.
The crèche gives the children a head start in learning, all while helping their mothers to be more autonomous and financially secure.
And that's all for this edition. So until the next show, bye for now.